We're going to begin by considering a very simple case. That is, a firm that produces just a single product and sets only a single price for its product. So we're going to go through the basic concepts of the firm's revenues, its costs, and then its profits. And we'll see what the logic is of how to maximize profits, given the information that we're going to assume that the firm has. So let's start with demand for the firm's product. We're going to assume that the firm sets, as I said a moment ago, just a single price for its product. And given the choice of that price, that's going to determine how much customers are going to buy. Of course, there's lots of other things that are going to influence how much the customers want to buy. So one of those things economists like to describe as their preferences or what they would get from buying the product. We often call it satisfaction, or we use an old-fashioned term called utility that some of you may have heard, which really just means the usefulness of the thing to a person, and therefore that's going to in part be reflected in how much they're willing to pay for it. Of course, people don't have to buy our product. There are alternatives, and presumably people are going to think about those. Not just the price of alternative products, but also their qualities and characteristics. There are other kinds of goods which I haven't mentioned here. For example, things that are called complementary goods, goods that might be used with our product. So if their price is changed, then that might influence how much of our product was going to be sold. So for example, if we were selling cars and the price of gasoline went up a lot, then that might influence our sales, because cars and gasoline, at least at the moment, are used together. What else might influence sales? Well, obviously people's incomes, possibly their wealth, other things like access to credit might be important. So there's all kinds of things that are going to affect demand. What we're going to assume for purposes of our reasoning here is that all of these things that I've briefly gone through are held constant, and we're just considering the choice of what price to set. And to keep our lives simple, we're also going to assume that our firm knows how much it could sell at different possible prices. So let's just have a look at a simple numerical example. So here's a table, and let's just walk through this table. I've put it together so that the numbers are really as simple as possible. We could imagine this as the amount of the product that our firm is producing in a particular period of time. Imagine, for example, that it's thousands of units per day or something like that. So we've got different quantities that we could produce, and we're supposing that we could sell those quantities at different possible prices. So the basic assumption here is that if we want to sell more, if we want to increase our sales, we're going to have to lower the price. And if we lower the price, then that's going to increase sales in a predictable way. So what I want to do is put that information together, the price of the product and the quantity that we're selling, and figure out how much revenue the firm is going to be receiving from those sales. So that's what's shown in the third column, just the product of the first two numbers. Well, it turns out that what we're really going to be interested in is this concept of marginal revenue. That is, how much is the firm's revenue going to change if it lowers its price by a bit and sells some more? So we can easily figure that out by just seeing how total revenue changes. So I'm assuming that if the price was high enough that we sold nothing, if we lower the price to $11 and we make some sales, that adds $11 to our revenue. Or it'd be 11,000 if this one represented a 1,000. But let's just keep the numbers simple. So we can see that if we lower the price to $10 and sell an extra unit, total revenue goes up to $20. The change between $11 and $20 is, of course, $9. So that's how much we've added to our revenues by lowering the price a little bit. Well, we could imagine doing that again. Suppose instead we set a price of $9 and sold $27 worth of product. Then that would have added $7 to our revenues. So by producing and selling one more unit at that lower price, we've added $7 to revenues compared to what it would have been otherwise. Well, we could go on imagining different hypothetical prices and quantities sold to figure out how much could be added to revenues at each of those possible steps. And we can see, it's important to note, that at some point, revenues could actually become negative. I mean, the addition to revenues. Now, how does that happen? Well, you can see that if we lower the price from $6 to $5, it's true that we sell a larger quantity of goods, but because we've lowered the price on everything that we've sold, the total revenue actually decreases. Well, that's obviously not going to be a situation that we're going to want to find ourselves in. But I guess I can just sort of give a hint of where we're going. Why do we care about this marginal revenue? Well, what we'll see later on is that we're going to want to compare that with marginal cost. That is, the extra cost that we would face by producing another unit of output. So here, if we lower our price and we produce an extra unit of output, that adds $9 to our revenues, but how much does it add to our costs? We'd need to know that to know whether it was desirable, in fact, to sell that extra unit of output. Okay, well, looking at this table of numbers is not very exciting. So let's try something else. Let's put these numbers in a picture and see what that looks like. That might help us understand the concepts a little bit better. So what I've done here is I've just plotted in this graph the points that we saw in the table. So here at a price of $11, we sell one unit. If we lower the price to $10, we sell a second unit. If we lower the price to $9, we sell a third unit, and so on. So the numbers in the table correspond to the spots where these dashed lines intersect. And what I've done is I've just connected all of those points with a straight line. So in effect, I'm assuming that perhaps it would be possible to sell 2.5 units of output, for instance. Well, this picture helps us to understand where marginal revenue comes from, how we can see why it changes here. If we start at a price of $11 and we want to sell an additional unit of output, we have to lower the price to $10. And that generates what I'm going to call a price effect. So because we've lowered the price, we get less revenue than we otherwise would have from that first unit of our product that we sold. However, we get what I'm going to call an output effect. We sell more output, and that is going to increase our revenues, in this case by $10. You can see that the area of this rectangle is 10, and the area of this rectangle is 1. So if I just take the difference between the two, the negative price effect, because we lost $1 on what we were selling before, but we have an output effect of plus $10. The net of those two things is $9. That's where our extra revenue comes from. Well, what we saw in the previous table was that marginal revenue is not constant. So let's just take another spot on the demand curve and see what marginal revenue looks like there. Again, keeping this price effect and output effect in mind. So let's tell a slightly different story. Suppose we're selling at $9 here, where we're selling 3 units of output. And we're considering lowering the price to $8 so that in the next time period, we'll sell 4 units of output. Well, we can see that that's the price effect, and there's our output effect. Marginal revenue is again just going to be the sum of the two, the price effect again being negative because we're imagining we're lowering the price, but now we're lowering the price on 3 units of output that we were selling before. So we're giving up $3 of revenue there to get an extra $8 in revenue because we're selling 1 more unit of output. So that's our output effect of 8, price effect of minus 3, the net effect plus $5. So that was our marginal revenue. I might just add, by the way, that we can see total revenue here as just the area of this rectangle. That's the revenue that we get when the price is $8. When the price is $9, total revenue is this rectangle here. So the yellow rectangle here is common to both. That's why I'm focusing on the price effect and the output effect as telling us what the change is going to be. Well, let's just put this all together. Let's compare those two pictures. We can see that marginal revenue is declining, and we can see why it's declining as price gets reduced. The issue is that the price effect is getting bigger and bigger, as the price gets lower and lower, because we're moving, in effect, down the demand curve. And if we lower the price a little bit more to sell one more unit, we're lowering the price on all of those previous units that we were selling before. So it's not surprising that eventually marginal revenue becomes negative, that the price effect becomes bigger than the output effect. Well, what I'm going to do is just take the numbers that we saw in that earlier table, and that if you've printed out my handout of these slides, you can be looking at them. Let's just put those together in a graph. So what I've done is I've just taken those values for marginal revenue, so the red dots here, and I plotted them here, and I've just joined those with a straight line because they do line up. So that's what marginal revenue looks like, and that's how it compares with demand. As a matter of fact, if we plot this accurately, the marginal revenue curve falls twice as steeply as the demand curve does. So if you were drawing that yourself, that's the way you would draw it. Some of the diagrams in the textbook, by the way, are rather sloppy, and they have not really been drawn properly. Let's just note one thing before I leave this. There's a spot here where marginal revenue is just 0. So what that means is that total revenue is just constant at that point. If right around here we just lower the price very slightly, we would sell just a little wee bit more, and the price effect and the output effect would exactly offset each other. The net effect would be 0. Well, there's nothing particularly special about that point. That is the point where revenues would be maximized. But we're not interested in maximizing revenues. We're interested in profits. So we have to think not just about revenues, but we also have to think about costs. So let's do that. But before we do that, I'm going to say a little bit more about demand. So that will be in the next video.